The blue light of my phone screen pulsed in the dark kitchen. This year we're celebrating New Year's at your sister's place. There's no room for you or your children. Mom wrote in the family chat. Then my sister added, but leave the kids with the nanny, and come cook dinner like always. Dad just wrote, and don't make us feel guilty. We're still expecting our gifts. I didn't make a scene. I just stared at the empty space where my dignity used to be. The kitchen was quiet, but my mind was racing with a decade of accumulated slights. My son tugged at my sleeve, his eyes reflecting the festive lights. He asked if we would see Grandma this year for the big party. I forced a smile that felt like cracking dry clay. No, honey, not this year, I whispered. My pulse hammered against my throat as I watched my family's icons glow green. They were all online, laughing in a private thread I was never meant to see. Their silence was a weapon they had finally perfected against me. I opened my laptop on the stained wooden table. The fan whirred like a rising storm. My fingers moved with a sudden, cold precision across the keys. I pulled up the spreadsheet for Vanessa's boutique, the one I managed for free. I saw the digital tethers connecting her survival to my credit score. Every password and every automated payment was a thread I had spun to keep her afloat. My hand didn't tremble as I hovered over the delete key for her entire database. I knew that without the daily backup I usually performed, she would be helpless by morning. The air in the house grew cold as the heater clicked off. I had just canceled the service plan tied to my name. Next, I logged into the family's streaming accounts and changed every password. No more free movies or shared memories on my dime. I sent a final email to the boutique landlord. I told him the co-signer was officially stepping away from the lease effective immediately. A notification popped up from the group chat. They were discussing the menu for a party I wasn't attending. I wrapped the gifts my father demanded with thick, silver paper. Inside weren't the expensive watches he expected. Instead, I tucked in the printed receipts of every loan I had given them over a decade. I included the $3,000 Vanessa used to save her shop. These were the only memories I had left of them. I tied the ribbons into tight, aggressive knots that looked like jagged teeth. I realized then that my children were finally safe from the shadows of this toxic house. By midnight, the house was silent and my work was done. I looked at the dark screen of my phone, waiting for the first scream of realization. Vanessa would try to log in and find only a void. Mom would reach for her tablet and find her world disconnected. I felt a strange, light buoyancy in my chest. I wasn't a daughter or a sister to them anymore. I was just the person who stopped carrying their weight. I finally turned the phone face down. The morning sun hit the cold kitchen tiles with a cruel, sharp brightness. My phone began to vibrate against the wood like a trapped insect. It was Vanessa. She was locked out of her boutique's inventory system and blamed a server error. I watched the screen glow without touching it. My objective was simple now. I had to remain invisible while her world quietly unraveled. Every second of my silence was a brick in the wall I was building between us. By noon, the pressure escalated from digital glitches to physical reality. My mother called 6 times in a row. Her voice usually carried the weight of a queen. But now it sounded thin. She couldn't find the wholesale login for the New Year's champagne order. Juliana. Stop playing games and fix this. She barked into the voicemail. I sat on the porch and watched my children play in the grass. They didn't miss the family. They missed being seen. The first major shift happened at 2:00. A private investigator I had hired weeks ago sent a single file to my laptop. It contained photos of Vanessa's boutique warehouse. Half the stock was being sold under the table to avoid taxes. My sister wasn't just entitled. She was desperate. I felt a surge of cold power. This wasn't just about a missed dinner anymore. It was about the fraud she had hidden behind my pristine credit score for years. I drove to the boutique under the cover of the gray afternoon. The shop was dark, but the "closed" sign was crooked. Through the glass, I saw Vanessa pacing among the mannequins. She looked smaller than I remembered. Her expensive coat draped over her shaking shoulders. I didn't go inside to help her. Instead, I taped a single envelope to the front door. It contained the formal termination of our joint bank account. Her eyes stayed glued to her phone. The air grew heavy with the scent of coming snow. I checked my bank app and saw the final transfer had cleared. All the funds I had contributed to the family trust were back in my personal account. The balance looked like freedom. Then, my father's car pulled into the driveway behind me. He didn't get out immediately. He sat behind the wheel, staring at the shop with a grim expression. He knew the foundation was cracking beneath them. He finally stepped out and gripped the top of his car door. "You're making a mistake, Juliana," he said without looking at me. "Family doesn't audit family." I didn't blink. I told him that people who treat family like staff shouldn't be surprised when the staff quits. His face turned a deep, bruised purple. He reached into his pocket and threw a set of keys at my feet. They were the keys to the mountain cabin I had always loved. I looked down at the metal glinting in the slush. It was a bribe disguised as an olive branch. He thought he could buy my silence and my service for one more year. I stepped over the keys and got back into my car. The power balance had shifted completely. As I backed out, I saw Vanessa finally open the envelope on the door. Her scream was silent behind the thick glass. My phone buzzed with a text from a blocked number. The text from the blocked number was a series of frantic bank alerts. Vanessa was trying to withdraw the remaining business capital, but the accounts were frozen. I sat in my parked car and watched the wipers clear the sleet. My objective was to ensure she couldn't drain the last of my savings. Every failed transaction notification felt like a pulse of justice. She had spent years spending my future. Now, the vault was finally locked from the inside. I drove toward the outskirts of town where Aunt Alina lived. The pressure escalated when my mother's car appeared in my rearview mirror. She was tailing me, flashing her high beams in the darkening afternoon. I gripped the steering wheel until my knuckles turned white. She wouldn't stop until she had a target for her rage. I needed to reach Alina's gate before Mom forced me off the road. The chase felt like a desperate, final hunt. I swerved into the narrow gravel driveway of the old farmhouse. Mom screeched to a halt right behind me, blocking the exit. She climbed out, her face a mask of aristocratic fury. "You have ruined your sister's reputation in one afternoon," she screamed. I didn't get out of the car. I simply rolled down the window an inch. The smell of wet pine and exhaust filled the cabin. I told her the truth was merely visiting the house she built. The power balance shifted when Aunt Alina stepped onto the porch. She wasn't holding a tray of tea or a welcoming smile. She held a thick manila folder and a professional camera. "I have the footage from the warehouse, Clara," Elena said firmly. My mother froze mid-sentence, her mouth hanging open. The realization hit her like a physical blow. Elena hadn't just been a witness to the family's greed. She had been the one collecting the hard evidence. Mom's posture collapsed as she looked from Alina to me. The threat of a public scandal was the only language she understood. She tried to pivot, her voice suddenly sweet and manipulative. "We can settle this as a family," she whispered. I finally stepped out of the car and stood my ground. I told her that the family she knew died the moment she excluded my kids. The cold air felt refreshing against my heated skin. Mom looked genuinely terrified. I followed Elena inside the warm house, leaving Mom in the cold. We sat at the kitchen table, surrounded by the scent of rosemary. Elena revealed that she had already contacted a boutique landlord of her own, She wanted me to head a new luxury catering firm. You have the talent, Juliana. You just need a kitchen that belongs to you, she said. My hands finally stopped shaking. I saw a path forward that didn't involve begging for scraps. We began drafting the business plan on a yellow legal pad. The obstacle now was the legal mess Vanessa had left behind. My name was still attached to several outstanding vendor debts. If I didn't settle them fast, my new venture would be dead on arrival. I reached for my phone to call the creditors. That was when a new message popped up from an unknown lawyer. Vanessa wasn't just failing. She was filing for bankruptcy and naming me as a primary debtor. The bankruptcy notice sat on the table like a live grenade. My objective was to protect my new partnership with Elena from Vanessa's legal fire. I had to prove that I was a victim of identity theft, rather than a business partner. The pressure mounted as the lawyer's second message arrived. He claimed Vanessa had my signed authorization for every loan. My heart skipped a beat as I scanned the attached documents. They looked hauntingly real in the dim kitchen light. Aunt Alina adjusted her glasses and leaned over the laptop screen. She pointed to a timestamp on the most recent loan application. You were in the hospital with your son that day, Juliana, she noted. I remembered the sterile smell of the pediatric ward and the long night. I hadn't signed anything. The power balance shifted instantly. Vanessa hadn't just used my credit. She had forged my signature while I was distracted. I finally had the evidence to dismantle her entire defense. I grabbed my coat and headed back into the biting night air. My goal was to confront the notary who had verified those forged papers. He was an old family friend of my father, a man named Mr. Henderson. I drove past the darkened houses of our neighborhood, my jaw set tight. The streetlights flickered against the fresh snow. I knew he would be at the local club. He was always there on Thursday nights, nursing an expensive scotch. The club was thick with the smell of cigar smoke and aged leather. I found Henderson in a corner booth, looking nervous. He tried to stand, but I sat down across from him before he could move. I placed the forged document on the table and tapped the signature. Tell me my father didn't pay you to stamp this, I said quietly. His eyes darted toward the exit. He knew his license was on the line if I went public. The turn came when Henderson reached into his briefcase and pulled out an audio recorder. He had taped the meeting with my father as insurance. On the recording, Dad's voice was clear and arrogant. He told Henderson that I was too busy to sign, but would approve later. It was a total betrayal of trust by the man who demanded my respect. I felt a cold, sharp stone settle in my stomach. My own father had engineered my financial ruin. I walked out of the club with the recording safely on my phone. The snow was falling harder now, covering the world in a deceptive white blanket. I realized that the family gifts I had prepared were far too kind. They deserved more than just invoices. They deserved the full weight of the law. I called my own attorney and authorized a counter-suit for fraud. My hands were steady as I gripped the wheel. I was finally playing their game. When I reached my driveway, a rental car was parked near my porch. A woman stepped out, wrapped in a heavy shawl. It wasn't my mother or my sister. It was my father's mistress from 10 years ago, a woman he had supposedly broken up with. She looked tired and held a thick ledger in her arms. I heard what they did to you, she said. She opened the book to show me my father's hidden offshore accounts. I stared at the leather-bound ledger while the woman shivered in the cold. My objective was to secure this evidence before my father realized his secret was out. The wind whipped around us, smelling of iron and salt. This book contained the truth about where our family's supposed wealth actually came from. It wasn't hard work or clever investments. It was a decade of systematic tax evasion and offshore shell companies. My hands felt dirty just touching the cover. The pressure escalated when a black sedan rounded the corner. My father had tracked her here. The headlights cut through the falling snow like twin daggers. I pulled the woman inside my house and locked the deadbolt. My heart hammered against my ribs as the car slowed to a crawl outside. He didn't get out, but the engine hummed with a low, predatory growl. He was waiting for us to blink. We were trapped in my own home. Inside the living room. The woman opened the ledger to the final page. She pointed to a signature that made my blood turn to ice. It wasn't just my father's name on the offshore accounts. My mother had signed every single illegal transfer. The power balance shifted completely as I realized the scale of the conspiracy. They weren't just using me for labor. They were using my clean record as a front for their entire criminal enterprise. I grabbed my phone and began photographing every page. Each snap of the camera felt like a nail in their coffin. The woman told me they planned to pin the upcoming audit on me. Since I managed the household accounts, I was the perfect fall guy. My eyes burned as I realized the depth of their betrayal. They hadn't just excluded my children from a party. They were planning to send their mother to a federal prison. The turn came when my phone buzzed with a message from Aunt Alina. She had managed to retrieve a secondary set of keys to the boutique's safe from the emergency box I had hidden in her attic years ago. "There is a digital backup drive in the floorboard." Her text read. I looked at the woman and told her we had to move. We needed that drive to connect the ledger to Vanessa's daily operations. If we could link them, the parents couldn't claim they were innocent. The woman nodded, her face pale. We slipped out the back door and moved through the shadows of the yard. The snow muffled our footsteps, but the cold was biting. I reached my car and started the engine without turning on the lights. I looked back at the house, seeing my father's silhouette in the sedan. He was still watching the front door, unaware we had escaped. I felt a grim sense of satisfaction. The hunter had finally become the prey in this game. I drove toward the boutique, my eyes fixed on the rearview mirror. The objective was almost within reach. But the road was treacherous and slick. I saw a flicker of blue and red lights in the distance. It wasn't the police coming to help me. A second sedan was blocking the intersection ahead. It was Vanessa's car, and she wasn't alone. She had brought the family lawyer with her. They were already moving to intercept the ledger. I slammed the gear into reverse, as Vanessa's headlights blinded me. My objective was to reach the local precinct before they could corner my car. The icy road hissed under my tires like a warning. Vanessa's car lunged forward, trying to pin me against the frozen snowbank. I saw the family lawyer, Mr. Sterling, shouting into a radio in the passenger seat. They weren't just following me, they were hunting me. The pressure tightened in my chest like a physical vice. I swung the wheel hard and drifted into a narrow alleyway. The brick walls scraped my side mirrors with a deafening metallic shriek. I had to ditch the ledger before they could physically take it from me. My hands were slick with sweat despite the sub-zero air. Vanessa was right behind me, her engine roaring with desperate anger. She didn't care about the car anymore. She only cared about the evidence. I saw a dumpster ahead and made a split-second choice. The car skidded to a halt near the rusted metal bin. I shoved the ledger into a waterproof bag and tossed it deep inside. I didn't stop to watch it land. I floored the accelerator just as Vanessa's bumper hit my rear light. The impact jarred my teeth, but I kept moving. The power balance shifted when I realized they thought I still had the book. I was the bait now. I led them away from the alley and toward the station. The turn came when I reached the brightly lit police parking lot. I didn't stop at the entrance. I drove right up to the main doors. Vanessa and the lawyer screeched to a halt behind me, trapped by the cameras. I stepped out of the car with my hands raised high. They're trying to rob me. I yelled toward the duty officer at the glass. Vanessa froze behind her steering wheel. She knew she couldn't touch me under the precinct's watchful gaze. Inside the station, the air smelled of floor wax and stale coffee. I sat on a hard plastic chair while a detective questioned Sterling. The lawyer tried to claim it was a private family dispute over property. I remained silent, watching the clock on the wall tick toward midnight. My heart slowed its frantic pace as the detective took my statement. I told him about the forgery and the hidden accounts. He looked at me with a weary, professional suspicion. The pressure returned when my father walked through the front doors. He didn't look like a criminal. He looked like a worried, grieving parent. He walked straight to the sergeant and began whispering in a low, authoritative voice. I saw the sergeant nod and look in my direction with narrowed eyes. My father's influence ran deep in this town. He was using his reputation to paint me as mentally unstable. I felt the ground shifting beneath my feet again. I reached into my pocket and pulled out my phone. I played the recording of Mr. Henderson admitting to the fraud. The detective's expression changed instantly as my father's arrogant voice filled the room. The sergeant stopped nodding and stepped back from my father. The power in the room drained away from the man in the expensive suit. My father's face turned a pale, sickly shade of gray. He realized the recording changed everything. He was finally caught. Then, the detective received a call from the team at the boutique. They had found the digital backup drive Entitlement mentioned earlier. But there was a new complication that made my breath hitch. The drive wasn't just about taxes or boutique sales. It contained encrypted files labeled with my children's social security numbers. My sister hadn't just forged my name on loans. She had opened offshore accounts in the names of my young sons, using the identification papers I had left in the family safe for safekeeping. The betrayal went deeper than I ever imagined. I stood up, my legs feeling like leaden weights. The realization that they had endangered my children's futures broke something inside me. I didn't cry or scream. I simply walked toward the exit. My father tried to stop me, his hand reaching for my arm. I pulled away with a look of pure, cold loathing. He saw that the daughter he knew was gone forever. There was no room for mercy in my heart. I was a mother protecting her pride. I walked back to the alley in the quiet, pre-dawn light. The snow had stopped, leaving the world hushed and heavy. I retrieved the ledger from the dumpster and held it tight. My phone buzzed with a message from the precinct. They were officially opening a federal investigation into the family's finances. I looked up at the stars and took a deep breath. The war was over. But the rebuilding was just beginning. I was finally, truly, on my own. I drove back to Aunt Alina's house as the sun began to bleed over the horizon. The weight of the ledger I had just retrieved from the alley was a physical anchor on the passenger seat. In the shifting light, my primary objective was to scrub my children's identities from the digital filth my sister had created. The cold steering wheel felt like a tether to a reality I barely recognized. My phone vibrated incessantly, with desperate messages from my mother. She was begging me to delete the recording before the morning news cycle began. I ignored her and focused on the quiet road. The world felt fragile and new. The pressure escalated when I logged into the encrypted drive at Elena's kitchen table. A federal firewall blocked my access to the accounts tied to my son's names. I realized the sister had nested these accounts inside a legitimate, corporate structure I couldn't touch. My chest tightened as I saw the sheer volume of money moving through their names. If the authorities moved too fast, my boys would be flagged as criminal beneficiaries. I reached out to an old contact from my accounting days, a specialist who could untangle this web before dawn broke. Elena placed a hand on my shoulder and handed me a small, rusted key. She told me it belonged to a safe deposit box my grandmother left behind. There is a power of attorney inside that your father never knew about, she whispered. I realized then that my grandmother had anticipated this greed years ago. The power balance shifted as I grasped the heavy brass key. I wasn't just a victim fighting back. I was the rightful executor of a legacy. We reached the bank just as the doors opened for the morning rush. The marble floors echoed with the sound of my hurried footsteps. The obstacle was the bank manager, a loyal associate of my father's inner circle. He looked at my grandmother's key with a skeptical, cold eye. I presented the federal investigation, notice I had received at the precinct. His face paled as he realized the tide had turned. He led me to the private vault without another word. Inside the box lay a document that changed everything about my family's history. It proved that the original boutique capital had actually been my inheritance from my grandmother. My father had stolen my start-up funds to build Vanessa's ego. I read the dates and the figures with a growing, icy fury. They had lived in luxury using my stolen future as their foundation. The free labor I provided was just the final insult in a lifelong theft. I felt a strange, liberating fire. The turn came when I found a second letter addressed specifically to me. It contained the login credentials for a master offshore account that controlled the others. My grandmother had outplayed my father from beyond the grave. With these codes, I could shut down the accounts in my sons' names instantly. I felt the weight of the world lift off my weary shoulders. I was no longer a pawn in their game. I was the one holding the master key to their ruin. I executed the shutdown commands from a terminal in the bank's private suite. I watched as the balances in Vanessa's shell companies dropped to zero in real time. The digital nodes turned red, one by one, across the glowing screen. I felt no guilt as I watched their empire evaporate into the ether. They had gambled with my children's lives, and now they had lost everything. The silence in the room was the most beautiful sound I had ever heard. I walked out of the bank and saw Vanessa standing by my car. She looked ravaged, her hair matted by the damp morning air. The accounts are empty, Juliana. What did you do? She hissed through her teeth. I didn't stop to argue or explain my actions. I told her that she should check the news before she spoke again. Her phone chimed with a notification that drained the last bit of color from her face. The federal warrants were finally being served. The twist hit when a black SUV pulled up behind her. It wasn't the police. It was the primary investor for her boutique's expansion. He looked at Vanessa with a cold, professional disdain that I knew well. He informed her that their contract had a moral turpitude clause. He was seizing the remaining physical inventory to cover his losses immediately. Vanessa was being stripped of her last shred of status. She turned to me, reaching out a hand, but I stepped back. I got into my car, leaving the chaos behind, and drove toward the park, where my kids were waiting with Aunt Alina's assistant. I had one final promise to keep before the day was over. I was going to take them to see the old park where we used to be happy. The rearview mirror showed Vanessa standing alone on the sidewalk, surrounded by the wreckage of her lies. My phone buzzed one last time with a text from Dad. He was offering a full confession if I helped him. I simply deleted the thread. I found my boys at the park, their laughter a sharp contrast to the morning's chill. My objective was to seal our future before the legal dust settled. I watched them run across the frost-covered grass, oblivious to the war I had just finished. The pressure mounted as I checked my final bank balance. I needed to secure a new home far from my father's reach. Every second spent in this town felt like walking through a minefield of old memories. Aunt Elena arrived with a folder of signed contracts for our catering business. She looked at me with a pride that didn't demand anything in return. The power balance shifted when she handed me a deed to a small, professional kitchen downtown. It wasn't a loan or a bribe. It was an investment in my actual talent. I realized then that I was no longer a shadow in someone else's house. I was finally the architect of my own life. The turn came as the local news broadcast began to circulate on every phone. Images of my father being led from his office in handcuffs flickered on the screens. The public scandal was absolute and irreversible. My mother was seen hiding her face behind a designer handbag as cameras flashed. They were no longer the elite pillars of the community. They were just two people who had run out of lies to tell. The truth had finally finished its work. We moved into our new apartment as the first spring buds appeared on the trees. The space was small, but it was ours and it was quiet. I spent my evenings testing recipes for a city that actually wanted my work. My kids helped me pack little boxes with handwritten notes for every client. There were no more calls from the family chat or demands for free labor. The silence was a luxury I had finally earned for myself. A year later, I stood on my own rooftop during a private New Year's celebration. I wore a silver dress that caught the light of the city below. My boys danced with their cocoa mugs, their faces glowing with genuine happiness. Someone asked me if I missed the old traditions at my sister's luxury home. I looked at the sparkling horizon and felt absolutely nothing for that past life. I told them that family is a choice we make every single day. The twist arrived when a small envelope was delivered to my table. It was a letter from Vanessa, sent from a halfway house across the state. She wasn't asking for money or a job this time. She simply asked for a recipe for the honey, glazed turkey I used to make. I looked at the paper for a long moment, then dropped it into the heater. Some fires are meant to burn until there is nothing left but cold, clean ash.